It will be hard to see chess the same way again after going over this brilliancy by Jose Raul Capablanca, the great Cuban world champion. In this game, he makes moves that are often counterintuitive. A couple of moves in particular violate our sense of what a game of chess should be played like. Yet in the hands of that great master, they're absolute brilliancies. His opponent is David Yanovsky. This was played in 1916 in New York. Yanovsky has white. Capablanca has black. Let us jump right in. Yanovsky begins with d4, knight f6, knight f3, d5, c4, c6. We have a Slav defense on the board. Knight to c3, and Capablanca plays the move bishop to f5. Now, this move is often frowned upon because it leaves this b7 pawn undefended. And Yanovsky immediately jumps on that with queen to b3, attacking that pawn. These days, people will take on d5 first and then play queen to b3. But this is a good move from white, and Yanovsky can be happy about his opening position against Capablanca. And this is the first move that Capablanca plays, however, that seems counterintuitive. He plays the move queen to b6, offering the exchange of queens and letting his pawn structure intentionally be damaged. The best move from white here is actually probably c5, inviting black to damage white's pawn structure, and he can advance this pawn. He has pressure on the A file. But Yanovsky goes ahead and takes Capablanca's queen. Capablanca takes with his pawn. Now, right now, these pawns are a nice cluster. So Yanovsky wants to isolate those pawns. So he takes on d5, knight takes, pawn takes. So Capablanca now has isolated doubled pawns. Normally something you don't want to have. It's considered a weakness. But as compensation, he has this open A file. And we'll see how he uses that as the game progresses. Modern computers see this as equal, by the way. E3 from Yanovsky, so he can get this bishop out at f1. He's not worried about this bishop. He's going to put the bishop on d2 anyway, so he doesn't mind blocking it in with the e-pawn. Knight to c6 from Capablanca, bishop to d2. And this next move completely, again, violates our sense. This is definitely an un-Paul Morphy-like move. We don't imagine we would see Paul Morphy playing this move. He plays the move bishop to d7. He moves the bishop back. So he now has moved the same piece twice in the opening, moving it back inside the pawn chain. What is he thinking? What is he up to? Well, we're going to see what he's doing here. Basically, his thought is this. He knows that the pressure on this pawn at some point is going to force white to move it if he wants to develop his rook. When this pawn moves, his light squares, particularly b3 and c4, are going to be weak. And Capablanca wants to exploit those pawns with moves like b5, knight a5, knight c4. And this bishop on d7 supports all of those ideas, including supporting a b5 push. Capablanca is going to use this weakness as a strength. Watch how he does it. Bishop to e2, e6, castles, bishop to d6, rook f to c1. Now notice this little decision by Capablanca. He does not castle. He figures his king is safe, so he plays king to e7, connects the rooks that way, and in an endgame, his king will be better placed than white's king because his king will be more active. He knows he's not going to get mated in this position. Bishop to c3 from Yanovsky, rook h to c8, and now a3, just like we were talking about, so he can develop his rook. If he moves the rook, he would just lose the pawn. But now he has created light squared weaknesses on b3 and c4, and Capablanca immediately plays knight to a5, aiming at both of those weak squares. And if white takes the knight, not only does he fix Capablanca's pawn structure, but he would give him the advantage of the bishop pair. So he does not want to do that. So he plays knight to d2 instead to try to challenge the knight with his own knight, but all of a sudden, white's the one reacting, and black has the initiative. Capablanca plays an interesting move, f5, clamping down on e4, and the knight on f3 would be better positioned to jump into e5, but on d2, he would have to lose a couple of tempo to get back there. So an interesting idea, and of course, he also wants to just gain space in the endgame. He uses space brilliantly in this game. So g3, stopping any potential f4 from Capablanca, and now b5. And we see the value of that earlier bishop retreat to d7. This is a bad bishop technically right now, blocked in by all of these pawns, but it serves a very useful purpose. And it is not going to stay blocked by those pawns either. f3 from Janowski. He wants to break in the center with e4. Capablanca goes ahead and moves that knight to the weakened c4 square. And of course, he's threatening to capture the pawn on e3 at the moment. So white has to react. If he plays king to f2, Capablanca could go ahead and play b4 here. And after pawn takes, the rooks come off. Knight takes. He gets a rook at c2, and he has very active play here. If the bishop moves to c3, bishop to b5, hitting the bishop if the rook blocks. If the rook plays to e1 to defend. Capablanca's plan is basically to play king d7, c6, exchange on e2, and play king to b5 and get into to white's position. So instead, he goes ahead and takes the knight with the bishop. But now, Capablanca has the bishop pair and a space advantage. e4, he breaks. King to f7, so the bishop after e5 can move to e7 instead of having to go back to c7. e5, bishop to e7, and we see the bishop is in a position to support a g5 pawn push. So Capablanca wants to play on both sides of the board, gain space on the queen side and the king side. f4 to control that. b5, king to f2, rook to a4, with a threat of doubling on the a file, which would create a pin here on the a3 pawn because of the rook, and then play b5, b4. That's his threat. King to e3, rook c to a8. He's threatening again to play b4 because of this pin. So the rook moves out of the pin. Now h6 to prepare to gain space on the king side. Knight f3 to help control that square, but it's not enough. Capablanca can still go ahead and play g5, which he does. Now the knight moves to e1. He wants to perhaps reposition itself at c2, but notice it interferes with these two rooks. They lose their access to the king side, and Capablanca immediately exploits that. First, he plays rook to g8 with the idea of taking on f4 and maybe opening up that file so his rook can become active. After king to f3, he does go ahead and take, and now rook a to a8. So he's shifting his rooks over to the king side. He has space on the queen side. He's shifting his rooks over because white can unravel. It's much slower for white to unravel because this knight is in the way. Very subtle play from Capablanca. Knight g2, rook to g4. The knight wanted to go to e3 to hit the rook, but if he goes to e3 here, then the rook can go to h4, attacking h2, and with that extra tempo, he could play the rook to g8 and would have a good position. So instead, white plays a rook to g1. Capablanca goes ahead and doubles on the g-file. And now bishop to e1. The bishop can go to f2 to defend the rook at g1, or maybe try to go to g3 to clog up the g-file. But here, a simple question. This is a Jeremy Silman question, if you've ever read any of Silman's books. We see this bishop on d7, right? And it's technically a very bad piece. It's blocked in by all of these light squared pawns. But if you were to ask yourself the question, what if I could just pick up that bishop and place it on any square on the board, any light square on the board, where would I put it? And you just ask yourself that question. If your answer to that question is the e4 square, then you definitely get a gold star. That e4 square would be a monster square for the light squared bishop, but how to get it there? Capablanca plays b4. The value of that bishop on e4 is so great, he's not worried about the loss of a pawn. He's created a route now. Bishop a4, c2, e4. Pawn takes, bishop goes to a4, threatening to play to c2, even gaining a tempo along the way. So Janowski plays rook to a1 to activate the rook. Bishop c2, going to e4, bishop g3, and bishop to e4 check. And compare that bishop that was sitting on d7 now with this monster on e4. Beautiful, beautiful chess. The king moves out of check. Now h5. Capablanca looks to crack open this g-file using that pawn. Rook to a7 does create a pin here against the bishop at e7. But now bishop takes knight. He gives up that beautiful bishop for tactical reasons, because after rook g2, h4 is coming in, forcing open the g-file. Janowski takes on h4. Now, he does have some pressure on e7, right? I mean, the bishop is hitting it. It's pinned by the rook at a7, but Capablanca is not worried about that. Rook takes g2 check, king to f3, rook takes h2, and now bishop takes e7. Now watch this maneuver. What Janowski wants to do here is move this bishop with a discovered check, and he wants to move the bishop to a square where it can attack something. So this is what Capablanca does. He plays rook to h3 check, king f2, rook to b3. Now look at Capablanca's pieces and pawns. Every single one is on a light square. That means this bishop at e7 has no targets. It can move anywhere, but it will not be able to attack anything Capablanca has in his position. Nothing. Everything is on a light square. Amazing. Bishop to g5, discovered check. King to g6, rook to e7. Rook takes b2 check. King to f3. And now after having his rooks on the queen side, moving him over to the king side, and now back to the queen side, rook to a8. And Capablanca is threatening rook to a3, which would be checkmate here. The king can't go forward because of this pawn at f5. And there's essentially nothing Janowski can do here. He can just delay it. He plays rook takes e6 check, king to h7, rook to e7. He had resigned, actually, before these last couple of moves. And then Capablanca could just play king to g8. And there's literally nothing he can do to stop rook to a3 mate. One of the greatest strategic games in the history of chess. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have enjoyed it. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.